when you're there in person, then you hear the noise and see the fear, it changes, it makes it more real. So I helped with the Kabul evacuation. I was there as a fuel truck driver, so we were just fueling up aircraft and powering generators and whatnot. When I initially got there, it was overall a pretty chill environment. It was kind of awe-inspiring initially. Afghanistan's actually a very beautiful country, but when we first got off the C-17, it was dusk, so it's just about to hit night, and it was nerve-wracking because the pilots are like over the intercoms are like hyping us up. It's like, all right, once the C-17 ramp gets down, grab all your shit, run to wherever the Marines tell you to go to and all that. And of course, admittedly, I'm like scared shitless, despite me trying to play it cool to my supervisors, because I went with me and my two NCOs, and I'm just like, yeah, everything's gonna be great, everything's gonna be fine. But got off the plane, froze, and just in awe, guess a little bit scared, but just in awe to seeing like the mountain ranges and the lights in the airport. From then on, we got off C-17. We were immediately, we threw all our stuff in the back of a pickup. We walked alongside it to the Cato Yard, which is basically where the refugees were staging to evacuate. So immediately we were like surrounded by refugees. And that's when you kind of realize it wasn't, I guess, the cleanest operation. It smelled horrendous. The refugees didn't have adequate bathrooms and whatnot. So as you can imagine, they were just doing what they did. Kids running around through that stuff. They had water bottles, and the Humvees would run over the water bottles and they would explode. So of course, me first time in Afghanistan, hear like a water bottle going off right next to me. I'm freaking out. But after a while, you get used to it. You realize you get into the swing of things. So that was, I guess, my first night there. It was really just us sitting around until our point of contact came to escort us to our compound, and the contractors were there to train us up on the fuel trucks because they were nothing that me and the Marines were used to. Even when I got there, the Marines had been there, I think, a week and a half longer than me. They still had no real idea how to drive these trucks because they were manual, and all the trucks in the U.S. military that we train are automatic. So, and driving a truck manual is very horrendous. But we talked to the contractors. They're either from Afghanistan or Nigeria or Indonesia. Couldn't understand a word they were saying, but they were the nicest guys ever. We didn't have any radios or night vision, just because of how rapidly we deployed. So the contractors gave us like these little helmet flashlights, and they gave us their little toy radios. They look and felt like toys. Honestly, I think we broke one almost immediately as they gave it to us, just because of how cheap they were. And that was our comms. The most powerful nation in the world couldn't give us radios. So other than that, any other communication we had with our leadership was through WhatsApp. So as you can imagine, very jank situation. Usually radios is how it's supposed to go. You make do with what you make do. So we use WhatsApp. It was not organized at all, and I learned later that I wasn't even the Air Force team that we sent out there, or that they sent out there, I should say, sorry. We weren't supposed to go. The Marines were leaving a week after we showed up, and then the Army was just going to take over. But of course, no one sent that memo, so we ended up kind of relieving the Marines, but they stuck around a little bit to train us up on the trucks. And then by the time they left, we were also getting ready to leave. So in the end, it didn't make any sense for us to be there, but we were there. What can I say? When it came to refueling, we were given strict orders on what aircrafts we were allowed to refuel and what we were not allowed to refuel. So commercial aircrafts, the Turkish, they sent their commercial airliners, and obviously those airliners can't be refueled in air. So we were given priority to refuel the commercial airlines and whatnot, and we weren't allowed to refuel any aircraft that weren't carrying refugees. So we had an incident where we went, and the French were trying to offload a tank in their little aircraft, and they wanted to fly it out. They didn't want to leave it for the Taliban, and of course we weren't authorized to refuel that. They had to take refugees, or they weren't getting gas. I don't know if we ever filled that plane. I just remember being turned away from it. I'm sure it was either refueled or abandoned for the Taliban, one or the other. But I know that aircraft was not going to leave with a tank on it. It had to leave as refugees. That was our strict orders. So they would head to Turkey. They would head to Europe. So like Germany, Britain. They would send them to Qatar. And then from there, they would send them to the US or Kuwait. So Qatar, Kuwait, US, or Turkey, Germany, Britain, just the EU nations. So they volunteered to take them in. And from there, they would be relocated, given citizenship, whatever. And of course, that's all well and good, but the people we were saving weren't necessarily, I would say, not, how how do I say this? We left behind a lot of good people. We left behind a female combat or medevac pilot. I forget which. I'm sure there's an article on it. I remember reading it. We left her behind. She was an Afghan pilot, and she was left behind. The Taliban captured her and then hung her with a helicopter. So those would be the individuals that I say we should have been saving or made a priority to save. But we left people like her behind, informants that were, helping us out fighting the Taliban, Afghan special forces that either weren't able to evacuate in time or refused to leave, doctors. I mean, we left plenty of good people behind, including American, British, New Zealand, Australian, French, and German citizens. I mean, we left them behind, and this administration, for whatever reason, declared this evacuation a success, which I could see it's far from it. But so there was one run. It was to Abbey Gate, the gate that would later be bombed in the suicide attacks. Obviously, this was prior to that. I wasn't supposed to go. 2 Marines had already volunteered to take it. They already knew the route. They were comfortable with it. I wanted to go just because I hadn't seen the Taliban at that point. So I just kind of wanted to see the front lines and see how the evacuation was going from the moment they entered from the gate. Initially, all was well. It was calm. We just got done filling some jerry cans, some generators. It wasn't too much. The refugees were curious, to say the least. I guess anytime they see any personnel, they would stare. Some of the kids will walk over and ask for like water and stuff. But obviously, we didn't even have water for for ourselves. But so we were just wrapping up. It's me and one Marine. We're just reeling up the hose. And the other Marine that was with me, he had walked off to go talk to the Marines guarding the gate. So he was, I don't know, I would say 10, 20 yards away. A good enough distance. But, I could still see him, so it wasn't a big issue. And then the shots came. So I don't know who fired first in my memory. I don't know if it was the Marines that fired from the wall or it was the Taliban from just on the other side of the gate. But initially when the shots came, the refugees kind of froze. By this point, I was already used to the shots. Though they were closer, the Taliban make a point to shoot almost 24/7 since we landed. So I didn't think much of it. But the first set of shots came, and then the Marines actually started firing along the wall. I could see that. And that's when the refugees started running. So they left their little organized chalks that the Marines had them in as they escorted them through. And during that time, there was a toddler, I guess, that was walking. And during the stampede, he was crushed to death. And I mean, by this point, we had dropped the hose. We didn't even reel it up all the way. The Marine is sitting in the driver's seat to make sure refugees don't like hop in or do anything crazy. I'm by the passenger door yelling to the Marine over there to try and get him back in so we can evacuate or just leave the area because obviously it's not safe anymore. But that's when I saw the toddler get killed. And obviously we couldn't leave since refugees were causing a storm. By the time the firing had stopped, the refugees had been corralled into their chalks again. That toddler, I mean, there's nothing left to do for him. The injured were packed up in the back of a pickup and brought to our little med clinic tent, or not tent, but like building that we commandeered. And I mean, that was that. Our Marine finally came over. We reeled up the hose. We got in. We drove off. We didn't tell anyone. We didn't tell our supervision because our supervision was already cagey about sending us to Abbey Gate. They wanted us to stop fueling over there. So obviously we didn't want to tell them anything because we still wanted to go over there to give whatever the Marines at Abbey Gate any sort of comfort because that was their heaters that we were fueling up. That was their vehicles, So we didn't tell our supervision. We kind of just kept it between the three of us. But yeah, that toddler. It was one of those moments where I realized what like fear can do to people. I mean, being crushed by your own countrymen, the damnedest thing. It's one of those things where like when you realize later on that you weren't even supposed to be there, you kind of question, did you really make a difference? Couldn't someone else have done it had you not gone? But I like to think that I made some sort of difference over there. If nothing else, I know my team most certainly did. We had like one female on our team. We worked on 12-hour shifts, so she was day shift. And I know that she made, I guess, she kept the refugees calm anytime she went on a run or when she was ever put in a situation where she would have to deal with them. And I know for the kids especially, they loved her. So that was at least something positive to come out of that. But of course, on night shift, we're just a bunch of dudes. We don't really know how to deal with the refugees. We can't speak their language. Some of them clearly hate us. Some of them are just picking the lesser of two evils, the Taliban or the Americans. But it's tense. What can I say? But I think maybe I made a difference. I still have dreams about it. It's vivid. I've only told my brother when I got back home, I would wake up in the middle of the night just in a cold sweat. And it's weird because like I grew up with like Live Leak and all those, gory videos and whatnot. So I would always thought I was kind of desensitized to that sort of stuff. But I guess when you're there in person, then you hear the noise and see the fear. It changes, it makes it more real.